Acts chapter 27. Acts 27, this is where we'll be for our study tonight. We're going to go through the questions again, even though it's not 2 chapters. We're going to go through the questions just because I want to go through the questions. And y'all aren't teaching, I am. So, we're going to go through these questions tonight through the class. Hope you have come prepared. It's funny how you're just a little too warm with the jacket on, but as soon as you take the jacket off, I'm freezing. All right. Hopefully I'll get a little warmed up, teaching. It sometimes happens. Acts 27. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for the blessings that you've given to us. We thank you for our time of study in the middle of the week. We thank you for this opportunity to grow, to be nourished by your word, and to better reflect upon those heroes who went before us and the way you provided for them in their times of difficulty. We pray you'd be with our shepherds as they watch over us. Be with all of us as we're gathered tonight around your word, those in the back classrooms as well, teachers and students alike. May we better apply these things to be better servants of yours. Pray you'd give us opportunities to share your gospel with the lost world. Pray you'd give us the courage to do our job in this darkened place. We love you, Lord, and pray you'll be exalted. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. At the end of Acts chapter 26, we've got Paul, who is about to go to Rome. At this point, he's been in Caesarea for a little over 2 years, and so they're about to begin their voyage. I'll ask question 1, because I'll get ahead of myself if I don't. Question number 1, who is traveling with Paul? Luke? How do we know Luke is there? Say it again. Changes to we. Pay attention to that when you're reading Acts. Remember that the last time Luke was mentioned, the last time the author was mentioned, was back in Acts chapter 21, verse 18, where we, or us, a plurality, either way, went into the elders and James in Jerusalem, Acts 21, 18, okay? Now we're picking back up with Luke's personal account. All right, Luke is there. Who else is there? Aristarchus. Yeah, that's okay. That one there's a toughie. Aristarchus is also with them. We don't have him mentioned very, very much. He's mentioned in Philemon verse 24. He's mentioned in Colossians 4 and verse 10. It's worth noting he is not mentioned again in Acts. It's possible, because he is from Thessalonica, as it says in verse 2, that he only journeys with them until they catch the coastline of Asia, and then he's going to go on over to Thessalonica up through Macedonia and everywhere else to get to Thessalonica. It's also possible that he traveled all the way to Rome with Paul. Because again, Paul mentions him by name in Colossians 4 verse 10, which Paul writes while in Rome. He mentions him in Philemon verse 24 while Paul is in Rome. I want us to think about something. I've not done this. I've tried to sprinkle in here or there's, but I'm going to do it up front now because I think it's kind of important and it impresses me as you read through this. This is one of the longest sections in Acts. This account. Paul's journey to Rome. He doesn't actually get to Rome in the end of the chapter. Luke covers almost 2 full chapters just on Paul's journey to Rome. Okay? Now, as you're thinking through that, remember who he's writing to. He's writing to a man named Theophilus. Luke chapter 1. He's writing to a man named Theophilus. Theophilus, you need to know about these Jesus followers. And Theophilus, you need to be a Jesus follower. I want you to think, in practical terms, I read one particular man who said that the short story of Paul's journey to Rome is a classic piece of literature in its own right. You think about this, and I don't know if you've read it. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands because, I always hated that when I was the guy sitting there who hadn't read it. No, please don't make that, because I'll either have to be honest or lie, and I don't want to do either one of them in the moment. So you think about this short story, though. Man, this is better than modern television. Luke records some of these events, and you're just drawn in. You're sucked into the drama. What's going to happen next, Luke? Well, this day this happened, and then the next day this happened, the next day this happened, and you can see the panic in every single word. He is purposeful. One of the guys that I was reading said this rivals the Odyssey, except it's just shorter, and it's stuck in the rest of the book of Acts, so you overlook it. But this is a fantastic narrative where Luke is very precise, very detailed, and it reminds us of a legitimate eyewitness account. So here's what we do with that. Number one, you want to write this down. I had to write it down because I can only remember so many things. Number one, as you're thinking through this entire narrative, the entire shipwreck story, the entire journey to Rome, here it is. Number one, we can trust God even when we don't know all the details. Please observe, as you're reading through this passage, there is only one little spot where it reveals God spoke to Paul. And he does it through the voice of the angel. An angel stood by me last night and he told me, I will go to Rome. I'm going to be okay. And everybody who's with you, Paul, will be okay. Does that mean God gave Paul every little detail about what was going to happen to him? Not at all. Paul knew he was going to Rome before he went to Jerusalem. Remember that? Paul knew he was going to Rome while he was in prison in Caesarea. God told him so in Acts 23. So nothing has changed. Now Paul's beginning a very long and arduous journey to Rome, and he doesn't know all the details, but he knows God is going to get him through it. Now I don't mean that in an application of some trivial sense. Nowhere does God promise He'll get you through every earthly or physical difficulty. I'm going to tell you something, folks. There's been a lot of people lose their faith because somebody has fed them that, and it's not biblical. God does not promise to get you through every hardship. Stay with me just a second. God does not promise to get you through every hardship. He does not promise to get you through every financial difficulty. He does not promise to get you through every health scare. You know what God does promise to do? Forgive you of your sins and take you to heaven when you die. That's it, folks. Now, there's a lot of beautiful implications of that, okay? But if we try to pervert it in some kind of a physical application, we're going to miss the point and we're going to hurt somebody. We're going to really hurt somebody. Because that's how people end up. They sit in a situation where, I've got this horrible diagnosis. Why isn't God healing me of this? I don't believe in God anymore. You see my point? We got to be careful about that. But Paul was confident, not knowing all the details, he was confident that God was going to take care of him. All right, here's number two. Our trusting in God can help others. I love how the relationship between Paul and these other men developed through this story, through this particular event. At the beginning, you can already see some respect between Julius and Paul, but folks, by the end of chapter 27, Paul is saying, hey guys, here's what we need to do. And all of the Roman officials are going, okay, Paul, what do we do next, Paul? You see my point? Now, if we get that, we're going to finish the chapter. But observe that. Primarily, Paul at one point says, hey, we really shouldn't leave right now. And they're like, we're going to do what we want anyways. By the end of the chapter, Paul's like, hey, we shouldn't do this. And the Roman commanders are like, okay, yes, Paul, we will follow what you say now. Okay? So just observe that. Paul's faith helped others, even unbelievers. All right. Back to the questions. So question number one, we have at least Luke, we have Aristarchus beyond the unbelieving crew that will be with them. Question number two, what keeps preventing smooth sailing and why is that detail important? Verses 4 through 8. The wind. The winds are contrary. Why is that detail important? All right, here's what I want you to think about. I've tried to make this point several times. So this is the overall map. That's a long ways, folks. He's trying to get from Jerusalem. Now he's gotten from Jerusalem, he's gotten to Caesarea, but he's trying to get from Caesarea to Rome. That's a long trip. So when he leaves leaves Caesarea, you see that little hop, that's probably a little distorted, but it's done that way so you can see it really well. He hops over to Sidon, they're about to take off, and boom, there they go. They're going to sail around these particular areas. They go to the north side of Cyprus, the island there. Now, if they were going to Caesarea, they would probably sail to the south side of Cyprus. You actually see that in Acts 21 when they're on their way to Jerusalem. You remember that, Acts 21 verses 1 through 3. Cyprus is on their left. Well, now Cyprus is on their left again because they're going to the north side of the island, but they're fighting wind constantly. Now, all of that affects a lot of things. Number one, it affects the time of sailing. What should be a quick trip, not the gas stations, what should be a quick trip turns into a difficult trip. And you're seeing that opposition the entire journey to Rome, by the way, but you're seeing it even here early on. Now, here's part of why that detail matters, and we've tried to make this point a lot through the account. We're going to continue to drive this point home because I hope that what it does is help remind you we're reading authentic history. That is a detail that Luke adds because Luke was there. Remember one of the earlier points we made in chapter 17, 18, 19. Luke's like, Paul did this, Paul did that, Paul did this, and in 3 verses, he's covered like, what, a year? But now Luke is with them, and he's like, well, on day 1 we did this, on day 2 we did this, on day 3 we did this. Now you're seeing that just in a few verses in Acts 27. Because Luke is with them. Luke is there. He's writing his own personal account. Pay attention to the details, because the details help establish credible historical witness. Okay? Questions or comments on that? Question number 3. Why did they not remain in port? So let's just go ahead and read verses 9 leading up to this. Acts 27 verse 9. Now when much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them and said to them, Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the helmsman and the owner of the ship more than the things which were spoken by Paul. And because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete opening toward the southwest and northwest, and winter there. So the question again, why did they not remain in the port? They wanted to find a better place to winter. Now, as you're seeing some of this, Paul has, and we're a little behind right now on the screen, but Paul has traveled through several of these areas. He's preached on the whole island of Cyprus at this point. Remember, he made port at Attalia and Perga in his first journey. So he's preached through some of these areas. When they make port in Myra, they continue to skirt along the coast. Instead of hitting open water, because of the issues of the weather, they end up sailing along the coast, cutting through to Cnidus, and now they're going to cut across. They're planning to cut across over here to the island of Crete. I don't know why I went blank on that, but they're going to cut across the island of Crete. But every turn they take, they're facing more difficulties because this is not a typical time of year for sailing. After a few months or a few days in October, sailing became much more unlikely. And then, generally speaking, after about November 11th until sometime in March, they wouldn't sail. Winter makes it kind of tough to do things. You're fighting cold weather, you're fighting just difficulties living and moving and so forth. Now, add in all the complexities of sailing, this becomes a much more difficult thing to do. So generally they didn't sail after October, but then really not after November. Now, you can already tell that this is late in the year. This is September, October now. Because in verse 9, it's because of the fast, or because the fast was already over. That's the day of Pentecost. So this is late in the year, already not a great time of year to travel. So all of these complexities make it much worse. That's exactly why Paul says in verse 10, guys, let's not do this. Let's just hold up here for now, and if we don't, we're going to have some problems from this. I'm going to throw you a curveball. Why would Paul say this? Why would Paul say this to these people? Now, don't jump and say, well, God is working through him. He's prophesying. Okay, you're going to have an issue if you say he's prophesying because it doesn't come to pass. Now, did they lose a lot of stuff? Yeah, they lost a lot of stuff, but nobody died. So I don't think this is prophecy. You may remember, 2 Corinthians 11, Paul said he had been shipwrecked 3 times. That's all before what we're reading right here. So when Paul stands up and speaks to these people and says, guys, we don't need to leave right now. We need to stay put. We can wait this out. We can go after winter's over. That's because Paul had already lived through 3 shipwrecks. He kind of, I don't know, my gut is telling me, he's like, I'm a little skeptical of this trip. Let's just wait it out, guys. And they're like, not so much. You hush, prisoner. So they're going to do what they want to do. You've got the captain of the ship. You also have the owner of the ship present, which this wasn't uncommon. This was probably a cargo ship, a grain ship, sailing to Rome, especially before the winter months. So all that's pretty consistent with what history would tell us. So they want to stay because of the winter. Now, if you'll notice on the island of Crete, they're going to end up sailing around the island of Crete. They want to make to make the city of Phoenix there, not Arizona, by the way. Almost positive about that. So they're going to try to make the city of Phoenix because it was a little bit more suitable for winter. They could stay there longer, a little larger city. This little city, Fair Havens, up inside this gully here, was not a typical port city. Remember, so much, and it's just a little fascinating when you read a little further into the story, so much about this event is atypical. Now, all of these people on this ship are probably pretty well seasoned at traveling along the ocean, but because the weather is so bad, they're taking routes they don't normally take. You follow me? So you're going to see that in a minute when they start seeing land. They're like, well, we don't even know where we are. They don't recognize it. Why don't they recognize it? Because they're having to travel atypical routes as they're trying to just get anywhere. You can right at the very end of chapter 27, you're going to see that. So they're trying to get to Phoenix. They want to winter there. They will not listen to Paul, and so they're going to press on. Now, in verse 13, this is Acts 27:13. When the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, putting out to sea, they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous headwind arose called Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive. And running under the shelter of an island called Clauda, we secured the skiff with difficulty. When they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship, and fearing lest they should run aground on the citrus sands, they struck sail and so were driven. It's really fascinating. There's actually been a lot of really good books written about Paul's travel to Rome. Luke is not a sailor. And yet what he does is very wonderfully give us word pictures depicting accurately sailing of the first century. So they think the wind is doing them some good here. But you recognize they're on the south side of this island, up in that gully. It's like, the winds are favorable. So they set out, they're going to travel, and actually the line does pretty good. They're going to travel along the sea, or along the island here. They're using the shelter of the island. Now here's what you don't see on the picture. Island of Crete was a mountainous island. Lots of high, tall peaks. What does that do to the north wind when you're on the south side of the island? It blocks it, doesn't it? Now, when they pass Mount Ida around the center of the island, which is kind of what's happening in the verses we're reading, that north wind is no longer blocked as well. And what happens? Poof! They catch that northern wind and they can't do anything but go with it. See how all of this is consistent with not only the topography of the area, as best as we can tell from history, and history. And so they drive out and they find this little island, or they go beside, this little island right here called Clauda. Now, basically what he's describing here, and some of the newer translations will say this even, this is almost like a hurricane. And the word Euroclydon is actually 2 different words put together. It's a Latin word and a Greek word, and it basically means winds out of the west and winds out of the north. And so it's depicting almost this idea of a hurricane. And by the way, when you read 14 days later, they're still dealing with this thing, it very much has this notion of at least a tropical depression. And it kind of has that effect because everybody's pretty depressed on the boat. So I threw that one in for you for free. It's Wednesday. I thought I would just try to lighten the mood a little bit. So yes, tropical depressions do create depression. All right. They're caught by the wind. They go to set down, they go to secure the skiff, verse 16. And the idea, they're taking these almost like lifeguard boats. We've all seen those on the sides of ship. Well, they had them in the first century as well. Small ships they designed to actually transport them up to the island or up to the coast when they had to make anchor off of the ocean or off into the ocean. Because of the weather, they're having trouble raising this one up. So they finally get it in, and then they secure the rest of the ship with ropes. Practice of the first century sailor was to generally take ropes and fish them around the entire boat because the boat is made out of wood. And so they fish these ropes around the entire vessel to help hold the lumber in place during bad storms. Now, if you're picturing a little bitty boat, you're probably sailing the story short. Now, we're going to get to it in a minute, so I'm not going to throw out how many people are on this ship, but it wasn't uncommon to have vessels in the first century that could accommodate as many as 600 people. These things are pretty massive. They've unearthed ships that were 180 feet long and 50 foot wide and 50 foot deep. That's a big boat. If you need any help, it is the entire width of our parking lot. Yes, I did map it on Google Maps. It is the entire width of our parking lot, 45 feet wide and 45 foot deep. It's a big boat, folks. And so but these were designed to carry lots of cargo to Rome, mainly grain, but they would not only secure grain, they would secure passengers and other smaller cargo, just like stuff happens today. Here's your main product you're shipping, but if you got room for other junk, you might as well make a little more money. That's what they were doing here. Now, that becomes important because of what they're going to do in just a moment. For fear of stepping on my own points, question number 4. What was the fear of the crew? Verse 17. Running aground. The citrus sands, you can kind of see it here, are off the northern coast of Africa. And so you can tell this storm is really pushing them across the Mediterranean. They're concerned of running aground over here. In fact, that was even called the ship's graveyard. I mean, it was a place where ships went to die. It was a pretty bad place. Well, they're afraid of catching some of that here, and you can see that in all of the way that they're talking about that. Now, before I get ahead of myself, man, I get excited, I get to talking. I'm not going to give you away answers, though. Question number 5. What happened on the third day and what caused it? Verses 18 and 19. They threw the ship's tackle overboard. All right, look at verses 18 and 19. We being exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship, and the third day we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now, you think about what they're going through right now. It's hard for us to imagine this. But these guys are incredibly overwhelmed by the situation. And so what you have here is well-trained sailors who know what to do in times of great distress or emergency. What do? Well, you start throwing off the things you don't need as much. But here's the deal, folks. Just like today, by the way, people are not very quick to throw away things they've paid for. People are not very quick to get rid of things that cost them money. You think the first century is any different? This is stuff they have bought. You've got the ship's owner here. You've got the captain of the ship. This is a statement about their desperation. Now, it gets worse. That's what's even cooler about this. That's why I said this is better than primetime television. But it gets worse because what they're doing is they're throwing away all the tackle overboard. This would be stuff that they would use to make port. This would be stuff that they would not use often. Might be like extra sails, extra rigging, extra tackle, extra buckles, things like that. Stuff that weighs a lot, let's lighten this ship up. So that if we do get around this shallow water, what happens to a lighter ship? It stays above the water a little more, doesn't it? That becomes important again as you get to the end of the chapter. All right? So, verse 20. I want to fill in some of these pictures between the questions. Verse 20. And when neither sun nor star appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. But when they had gone a long time without food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. Now we'll dig into some of the things he says in just a second. But for now I want you to notice verse 20. First century sailor. How important is the sun or stars? That's it. I can say this dogmatically with certainty. There was no Garmin. They did not have Siri. Siri, what is the quickest route to Rome? You're in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean. You can take any direction you want. So, no, they didn't have any of that. So what they had to do was rely on sun, rely on stars. When all that goes away for several days, you talk about panic setting in. Because every day that you don't see it is one day you're another 30 or 40 miles off course. That's exactly why this red line is going. Folks, this thing is moving because the wind is blowing it. You talk about panic. Now, so much so in verse 21, they're not even eating. Now, we'll address that more in just a minute, but I want to say this for now. I don't think that means that they didn't actually eat anything. I'll explain myself on that in just a moment, I hope. But the problem, when a ship is being beat around like that, you're probably not cooking full meals. You ever tried to cook in the kitchen with the kids around? You know, now do it while water is coming over the side of your boat. You're not cooking much. So these guys are not actually eating much. Further than that, reason would say if the wind is this bad, the storm is this bad, they may not be in the mood to eat much. I get motion sick just thinking about boats. These guys may be seasoned sailors, but everybody has a threshold. So there may be seasickness as well. All right, question number 6. So why did Paul tell them to take heart, these few verses here? That's it. Because God had told him. Look at verse 23. This is where we stopped. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has given you all those who sail with you. Therefore take heart, men, for I believe God, that it will be just as he told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. Please appreciate, verse 21 is not a neener, I told you so. That's not what he's doing. But let me tell you what he is doing. He is telling these folks, hey guys, do you remember earlier when you didn't listen to me? You saw how that worked? Listen to me this time. Okay, does everybody kind of see that point? It's like you didn't listen to my warning earlier, listen to my warning now, because this is important. Now, just for the record, there are some poetic similarities between this whole scene and the gospel itself. A warning given to a man by God to go warn others with. If they'll listen to him, they'll be saved. If they don't listen to him, their life will be lost. Does that kind of fit a little bit to the whole gospel itself? A little bit. Now, verse 24, God had already told him this stuff, that you're going to go see Caesar. He just kind of reaffirms that here, but there is an addition to it this time. Those who are with you are going to be saved too. They're going to be delivered. And so Paul tells them, you need to take heart because I believe what God told me. Notice how he introduces God. He calls him, verse 23, the God whom I belong and whom I serve. Remember something, folks. He's on a ship with a bunch of pagans. They don't know this God. Now, they might know a little bit. They might have heard why Paul is there, why Luke and Aristarchus are with him, but they don't know much. Paul introduces God by saying, this is the God whom I serve, whom I belong to, and then he says, verse 25, I believe God because he told me. Now, I want you to look at verse 26. However, we must run aground on a certain island. You notice, God tells him, hey, Paul, it's going to be okay. But he does not give him all the details, does he? Doesn't tell him which island it's going to be. Doesn't tell him when it's going to happen. He just tells him, hey, Paul, you're going to be okay. Paul, that better be good enough for you. Boy, that's something we need to think about, folks. To the point I made at the very beginning of class, God doesn't tell us all details. He doesn't tell us all details every time. He tells you the general things, and then you got to trust Him with the details. But I'm going to tell you something. God's the guy you can trust, if I can say that. God is a being. Let's say it like that. God is a being that you can trust with the details. Now, you can't see it in this picture very well. Hold on, let me see if I can back up a little bit. Okay. You recognize the island in the center of the screen? That's where they sailed out of, Fair Havens. That's where they sailed out of. You notice the little island they're going to crash on the far left end of your screen. That's the only island there. You see that? There is no other island there. You talk about a needle in a haystack. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about that. Sometimes it helps just seeing it. God tells Paul, Paul, you're going to run aground on a certain island. The certain island is some 500 miles away and in the middle of nowhere. If they miss that island, looking at that picture, if they miss that island, they're going to have to go another 200 miles to try to find the coastline of the only land there. And yet God providentially gets them to that certain island. Everybody see that? It's worth noticing, okay? So God doesn't give them all the details. He just says, you're going to have to trust me, Paul. And Paul certainly did. All right. That's the mission he has. That's the words he gives to those men. Those men are going to have to trust him as well. Question number 7. Question number 7. Man, I did. I got excited and I answered the question. Question number 7. Why was Paul so confident? God told him. That was a softball, man. I just went on a whole 4-minute discourse about it. God told him. That was good enough for Paul. You see, folks, Paul had not, I know, and I've tried to stress this, we think sometimes, we act like sometimes that God was just kind of whispering in Paul's ear. Every time Paul did something, God would just kind of whisper him in it. No, He wasn't. You know, we only have just a handful of times where God speaks to Paul in Acts. It happens in Acts chapter 16, where Paul's thinking, you know what, I want to go here. And God says, you're not going there, Paul. And then the next verse, Paul goes, okay, I want to go over here instead. And God goes, nah, don't unpack your bags, Paul. I want you to go somewhere else. We don't see God speak to Paul again until chapter 23. When Paul's already imprisoned and God says, Paul, sleep easy, buddy. You're going to Rome. You're going to see Caesar. The next time we see God speak to Paul is right here. So don't sit there and think, well, Paul has so many more blessings and so much more blah, 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 blah than I do. Folks, I fully believe that God inspired Paul to write the things he wrote, but God was not sitting over Paul's shoulder and just kind of whispering in his ear, this is what we're going, this is how it's happening. Paul had to work on faith just like we do. You get that? I think that's an important point, and it's something I had not really considered until reading through some of this. God tells Paul this is what's going to happen, and Paul says, God, I trust you. That's what we've got to do today, okay? All right, question number 8. What were some of the sailors seeking to do, and what was Paul's warning? Verses 30 and 31. I can hear some of it. What were they seeking to do? Escape. There we go. Escape. Now, look at Paul's warning. Or excuse me, look at verse 30. Verse 30, what the sailors are doing. They're seeking to escape, but they're going to do it by trying to cut the skiff down under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow. So they're going to go up and they're going to well, we're going to let the boat down. Guys, y'all just all relax. We're going to take care of this. We're going to set the skiff in the water. And these guys are like, oh, we got them. And then Paul's like, you don't got me. So Paul says, if anybody leaves, they're going to die. Now the captain, though, I want you to see this because I think this is important. Paul tells the centurion, verse 31, and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Look at what happens, verse 32. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and they let it fall. So look at how they reacted to Paul early in the chapter. Paul says, guys, I don't think we should leave the port here. We kind of got this, may not be the ideal harbor we want to stay around, but it's okay, we need to stay here. And they're like, nah, Paul, why don't you just hush? We're going to do what we're going to do. Fast forward a few verses, Paul says, guys, they're going to die if they get in that boat. And what does the captain do? Woof, cut that thing off. Again, it reminds you of not only how tense this moment is, but how much they trust the God of Paul. Now, I'm not saying they're Christians. Don't run off and take that assumption. But they're believing something, because this is a large vessel. Large vessel. That means they're not going to, it's like the movies, they're not going to run it up into the sand and everybody just hops off on this beautiful sandy beach. That's not what's going to happen in this big boat. They're going to get stuck out away from the ocean, or away from the shore. Their only way to get to the shore is the skiff they just cut. So now, a little bit of a difficult situation. But again, they listened to Paul's warning this time. All right. Question number 9. How many people were aboard the ship? This is verse 37. 276 people on the ship. Now, that's a lot of people. That is a lot of people. That's why I said this is not a little bitty, this is not your neighbor's bass boat. Okay? That's not what this is. This is a huge ocean vessel designed to accommodate who knows how much grain, because verse 38, that's what they throw into the sea. Remember something, folks. They've already thrown tackle and gear overboard. They've already thrown some of the food products, some of the other cargo overboard. Now they're throwing wheat overboard. This is a huge ship. And they still have room for 276 people? This is a big, big ship. Now, I want to visit this very quickly. We're running out of time. Paul in verse 33 encourages them. It's the 14th day. 14 days of dealing with this, folks. Whew. He says, you've waited here, continued without food, and eaten nothing. Therefore, verse 34, I urge you to take some food, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you. Think about that, okay? A couple of things. I know it says they've waited and continued without food and eaten nothing. I think Luke is using some hyperbole, okay, which is an exaggeration. Not saying that literally they did not eat a single scrap of food for 14 days. I don't think that's his point. I think he's basically saying they hadn't eaten much in 14 days. Does that make sense to everybody? Got questions on that, we can talk about it more later. Look at the scope of the way God provides for them. Look at the scope of provision, verse 34. He says, you're going to do this, you're going to eat your food, not a time of mourning, not a time of suffering, not a time of fear. Take courage, eat your food, because not a hair will fall from the head of any of you. Oh, man. That's awesome. Folks, they're in a situation where they're, verse 28, 15 fathoms off the sea, or 15 fathoms deep. It's like 90 foot deep. 90 foot deep. That's about what that is. They're going to run the ship aground right here, and they're going to have to swim to the shore. And God, through Paul, says, not a hair of your head is going to be hurt. That's pretty amazing. And that's the God whom Paul serves. So verse 35, they do those things. They take the bread, they give thanks to God. When they'd eaten and broken it, they encouraged them all. They took some of the food themselves. 276 people were there. Verse 38, they lighten the ship up more. And I made the point earlier, they lighten the ship again, hoping that it will go in further. Does that make sense? Ship comes on top of the water more when it's got less cargo. They're hoping it can get closer to the ocean, or closer to the beach. Now, question 10. Where did they strike the ship? Verse 41. Say again. Where did they strike the ship? Verse 41. On the reef. On the reef, where the two seas met. On the reef. Now, the picture doesn't show this, and please observe, there's a lot of things that can change in 2,000 years. So these islands don't look exactly like they probably looked when Paul saw them, okay? But for the most part, if that depiction is fairly accurate, then there was probably a spot on that far western side of the island where the two sides of the island's water met, which creates a rougher spot for water. Now, I made the observation earlier, if this is the southwest side of that island, It was not the typical port side of that island, which is probably why the sailors don't recognize it when they see it. So it's a little detail, not Luke's point, but certainly one worth pointing out. So look at verse 39. They see it. They see the land, but they do not recognize it. They see that there's a beach. They plan to run the ship aground there if possible. Now, verse 40, they drop the anchors in the sea. That lightens the load further. These anchors are huge things, especially if it's holding back a vessel as large as the one I described. So they drop those in the sea. They cut loose the main rudders. Typically they had 2 rudders, and they drop the sails. So what happens is they're going to catch as much wind as possible and still retain the right to steer this thing. They're going to aim it right for the sea, right for the beach. And that's where they're going to try to hit. Verse 41, they hit this spot. Notice where the 2 seas met. They run it aground. The prow struck fast and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. This reminds us not only of how much damage the ship has already taken, but of how dangerous it still is. I think for the most part, it's probably cleared up a little bit at this point because Luke doesn't mention how violent the storm is. He just mentions how violent the sea is. Okay? 2 seas meet, pretty rough water. So as the ship has taken all this abuse over the last 14 days, when it strikes the ground here, it's getting beaten all to pieces. Now, question 11 goes right into this. Question 11. What was the soldiers' plan in verse 42? Kill the prisoners. Kill the prisoners. We make this observation quite often, studying through the Gospels and so forth. A Roman soldier was commissioned with the responsibility of his charge. If he failed to carry out his duty, could cost him his life. So this wasn't just like an act of malice or violence. It was self-preservation. If we let these prisoners swim to the shore and they get away from us, we're going to die anyways. Let's kill them and we'll just swim to shore. That's kind of how this is working out. Now, they don't do that. Now, very quickly, that was the second bell, wasn't it? Charles and I are going to talk about that first and second bell stuff. So look at verse 43. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, commanded that those who could swim should throw themselves into the sea first and get to land. The rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship, and so it was they all escaped safely to land. That's answer to question 12. They all were delivered. But notice again, verse 43, here's the centurion who believes the word spoken by Paul. He didn't earlier, he's a believer now. I'm not saying in Christ, okay? I'm not saying he's a Christian. But I am saying he believes the things Paul's saying. Now, here's even more remarkable situation. God tells Paul, verse 34, Paul says in confidence that not a hair of your head will fall. Folks, he's talking to people that are far enough off the beach, they've got to swim for it. And some of them can't even swim. Do you see how remarkable it is that God literally saved everybody on this ship now? That there's nobody beyond His ability to save if you'll just kind of do what He says. You want to talk about a really good application? There's one right there. Nobody is beyond His ability to save if you'll just do what He says. He just saved people who can't even swim. And He did it off broken pieces of the ship. That's more awesome than I can describe. That's how it works though, folks. When they trusted in God, God delivered them. All right, I appreciate your attention. We'll finish up the book of Acts on Sunday with Acts chapter 28.